Hello all, welcome to Narayana IAS Academy. This is Sureka Bhaskar presenting to you the daily news analysis. So for today's discussion, we've picked up a number of topics from The Hindu and the Indian Express which are relevant and important for the UPSC CSE examination. Now let us have a look into the topics. So the first topic is US-UK hit Houthi targets in Yemen. This actually talks about the recent airstrikes conducted by the US and the UK at 36 Houthi targets in Yemen. So this actually talks about the complex geopolitics revolving around the issue, and we'll be dealing with who are the Houthis and how have they actually rebelled in the recent past. Moving ahead, the second article is also taken from the Hindu, page number 6, that is micro credentials, the next chapter in higher education. Here, as higher education is actually important, we'll be talking about how the micro credentials or micro credits actually play an important role in bridging the employability gap, which is nothing but the amount of skill that one actually has to possess after graduation to be absorbed into the job market or the labor market. The next one is MLAs return as Champai government faces floor test today. So this is actually a political news that is with respect to that of the Jharkhand Assembly. So this actually talks about the floor test. Here we'll discuss about what is the floor test, what is the procedure of conducting the same, who conducts it, who calls for it, what is the role of the governor as well as the speaker, the constitutional provisions, and also the associated landmark judgments with respect to the same of the Supreme Court. Moving forward, we have Crown Jewel that is taken from page number 10, Indian Express. This actually talks about the World Trade Organization and the current crisis in the dispute settlement mechanisms of this particular grouping. And here we'll actually talk about what are the alternative mechanisms that can be proposed. Moving forward, we have the next news that is taken from page number 13 of the Indian Express, Paytm Payments Bank's future uncertain post-RBI silence. So this actually talks about the Reserve Bank of India barring the Paytm Payment Banks from extending its banking services from February 2024. So here we'll be discussing about what is the payment banks and how it is actually different from that of the other traditional banks, its regulations, etc. And finally, to conclude with, after the discussion, we will actually be solving the prelims as well as the mains practice questions. The first topic for the day is micro-credentials, the next chapter in higher education. So as such, education is an important topic both in governance as well as in society and social justice. So here, the article is actually discussing on including micro-credentials, which is gaining importance, okay. So what is micro-credential? These are actually small or short-term programs that will actually give you certifications and it will help you bridge the employability gap. What is employability gap? As soon as you guys are a graduate from a college, whether you possess the sufficient skills to be absorbed by the labor market or not is the question. So in that way, micro-credentials actually become handy. So we'll discuss about what are micro-credentials, how it is going to enhance your employability, and also we'll discuss about higher education, the All India Survey on Higher Education, what are the observations of the report, as well as the government initiatives for improving the higher education landscape of India. So moving forward, as I told you, this is actually an important topic as we'll discuss about what is micro and the macro credentials. Macro credentials are nothing but your conventional degree that we actually do for 4-5 years, either engineering or any kind of integrated course, okay. So we'll discuss about the status and trends in higher education in India and how we can map it to the UPSC syllabus is it is related to issues relating to development and management of social sector and services relating to education. So we have previous year questions as education is a favorite topic for the UPSC. We have that in both the mains as well as the prelims examination, where you can see there was a question on quality of higher education in India in mains in 2015. And then there is actually an associated scheme that has been asked in the year 2017, that is Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, that is nothing but connecting institutions of higher education with local communities. So we need to actually stay very updated with respect to the schemes, its provision and the theme or the dimension or the domain it actually covers, whether it is education, whether it is health or whether it is women or elderly or senior citizens. So this is very important. So moving forward, let us understand what is the article is talking about. Micro-credentials within the Indian higher education landscape is proving to be of immense importance in order to bridge the employability gap faced by the graduates. That is, as I told you, employability gap is whether you have the sufficient skills to actually be hired by any particular company after your graduation. Okay, so this is what is your employability gap. So now let us understand what are micro-credentials. So, these are short-term educational programs that are aimed at imparting specific skills or competencies to the students. So, what do you mean by this? In case you actually have to learn certain software programs like Java or C++, this actually focuses on giving you very short-term programs on this particular genre. So, that is called as micro-credentials, okay? And it is validated through various standardized assessments, and it can not only essentially be given only, or what do you say, it does not require essentially a classroom learning. Okay, so it can be delivered online, it can be in person, or also in a hybrid format, and this actually caters to a wide range of learners. So what is the utility? As we already discussed, it bridges the gap between the traditional education. This is what is called as macro credential, which is actually based solely on your degrees and your performance in your semester examination, and the needs to the modern workforce. Otherwise, apart from the GPAs that you get, what does the modern job market needs? Whether you have the technological advancement in you, whether you have that expertise in you, is what is important. And it provides just-in-time skills that are directly applicable to their careers. Now, if we see the global examples, there are various educational institutions across the globe. There are various MOOCs. These are nothing but massive open online, content providers. All these people actually give you something called as nano degrees. They also give you micro master degrees. Various universities, if you see in Australia, in Canada, and if you see in Western countries like the US, they actually help you expand your educational outreach beyond your traditional degree programs. Okay, so these are the global examples. And of course, now let us consider or compare and contrast with the micro versus macro credentials. Okay, so if you see this particular tabular column, we can see the duration of macro credentials, that is your traditional degree, is several years. That is, we can have even 5-year courses in, if it comes to your law degrees or any kind of integrated courses, whereas micro credentials are short term, only for weeks to few months, and it will be certified also. The focus here is it is based on a broad academic foundation. Okay, either it is suggested by the UGC or AICTE, that is All India Center for Technical Education. So either that gives you the curriculum, but here it is actually specific with respect to the skills or the competencies that is focused on. How it is delivered, it is by on campus or it is a full-time mode, whereas this is online, in person, or it can be hybrid, that is mix of two. Next one, assessment, is it is based on a very broad curriculum again that we already saw, and here it is focused on specific outcomes. Now the credit assignment is, it is actually dependent or it is based on your time spent in the classroom or the laboratory, whereas this is actually based on the hours for competency. That is, the faster you gain your skills, the faster you are actually certified. The next one is recognition. These are degrees like any kind of bachelor's degree, any kind of master's degree, master of science, as well as your doctorate, that is your PhD. Here these are not in terms of degrees, but these are in terms of certificates as well as digital badges that you can actually carry forward. Now, it is very important to understand if India actually offer these micro credentials in its larger landscape of higher education. Okay, so now let us see. Now, Indian educational institutions are increasingly exploring the integration of micro-credentials. They are actually trying to integrate it with the National Credit Framework. We are trying to integrate it with the Academic Bank of Credits, that is the ABC. Whether it is in line with the National Educational Policy of 2020 is all that we will actually discuss. And moving on, we'll discuss about the status of higher education in India. Okay. So, do Indian education offer it or not? Indian educational institutions are increasingly exploring the integration of micro-credentials into their curriculum. So, integration into the National Credit Framework. What is this National Credit Framework? This actually establishes a standardized system for assigning credits. And also it enables the recognition of your credits. You can even carry forward your credits. You can even transfer your credits. And in this way, it actually makes your education as well as your credits more flexible and personalized. The next one is the academic bank of credits. This is nothing but it is like a digital library. Okay. This is a digital library that allows the students to accumulate as well as transfer their credit repository across institutions. And so it enables portability and stacking of credits. So you can actually tailor it as as it is required for your career goals. And moreover, if we see if this particular microcredits is in line with the National Education Policy of 2020 or not. Of course, National Education Policy does not mention the term microcredits. However, it focuses on various important dimensions like the education has to be multidisciplinary as well as holistic. It focuses on inclusive and equitable education. It focuses on vocational education at a very young age and academic bank of credits. So for all this and to enhance the quality of education, what is important is this micro-credential policy, and integrating all of them with India's higher education landscape and other frameworks is very, very important. Now back to basics. Now we've understood micro-credentials. This is just one aspect which has come in the news with respect to higher education. But what has to be your major focus for the examination is you need to understand what is the concept of higher education, whether it falls under state list or whether it is a concurrent list, and what are the various government initiatives so that you can actually write a good answer for your examination. Okay. So now let us understand what is higher education in India. So it is very important to understand that if you see, education was in the state list earlier, okay? But as per the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976, education along with 4 other subjects were transferred from the state list to the concurrent list. What is concurrent list? Here, the state as well as the center can make policies for that particular subject, okay? So what were these 5 subjects that were transferred from the state to the concurrent was? One was education, next was forests, next was weights and measures, next was administration of justice, and the next one was protection of wild animals and birds. Okay. So as you know, now education is actually falling under the concurrent list. So if you see the regulatory framework infographic that is given here, you can see the regulatory framework. Here, as far as the central government is concerned, there is a Ministry of HRD. This is actually now the Ministry of Education, and multiple other ministries actually frame policies, or they actually take care of the overall education framework in India. And we have other regulatory councils like the University Grants Commission as well as the AICTE, okay, that is All India Council for Technical Education. These actually take care or frame policies for higher education institutions in India. Whereas if you see for the state governments, there are departments, councils for higher as well as the technical education. Now, let us move into understanding what is higher education. The term higher education with respect to India, it is the tertiary level of education that you actually achieve or that you are imparted after 12 years of schooling, okay, from your kindergarten till your 12th grade. And India's higher education system is the 3rd largest in the world, next to United States as well as China. Now, we have some of the statistics from the All India Survey for Higher Education 2021-2022, and we look into some of the observations, okay. So, first one, it has found that the gross enrollment ratio for the age group of 18 to 23 years in India is 28.4. So, what do you mean by gross enrollment ratio? This is nothing but it is the percentage of students who are belonging to the eligible group of 18 to 23 years, okay. So, that is when you do your higher education, right, mostly. So, that is actually found to be 28.4. The gender parity index at the national level was found to be 1.01. What is this gender parity index? This is the ratio of female gross enrollment ratio to that of the male, okay. And next, the percentage of students who are attending government universities were found to be 73.7, and the graduates belonging to different sections of the population, that is OBC, SC, as well as other groups were found to be 35% and 13%. And then undergraduate course enrollment, that is BA, that is arts, was 34.2, science, and then followed by engineering as well as technology. Moving forward, now let us understand various issues that are actually plaguing the higher education sector and how does the inclusion of micro credentials actually enhance in plugging or in solving these issues. Okay. So the first one is shortage of faculty. So as we see, there are actually a lot of shortage of PhD scholars as well as faculty in these educational institutions. So what happens is that most of the times we are dependent on the conventional academic faculty pool. Okay, so in order to avoid this, if we actually have the MEC, that is the micro credentials, what happens, since it actually focuses on giving you specified skills, you can actually have faculties from other industries as well. That is, the experts from that particular genre can impart you education. So that way you can actually fill the gap of shortage of faculty. Next one is diversity of teachers. That is the same thing as I told you. So you have to attract instructors from various backgrounds. This will actually plug that loophole. Next one, the low gross enrollment ratio that we actually saw, that is the amount of people who are actually involved or enrolled in higher education in that eligible age category 18 to 23, that is very low. So this can be increased by accessible, flexible and affordable learning opportunities that can be done by providing micro credentials, that is short-term programs focusing on a specified sector. Next one is lack of financial resources. Okay. So this MEC can be cost-effective solution for institutions as well as students, because there is actually a lot of finances that is required to do a master's degree abroad or even in India. Okay, so people who cannot afford that, based on their career, requirement, they can actually choose a micro-credential program and pursue. Next one is poor quality of education. Sometimes what happens is that this poor quality of education is in terms of, first one is lack of faculty. The second one is due to curriculum disparity. Okay, so this can be solved by focusing on a particular genre of your interest. That is, it will bridge the gap between the academic curricula as well as the industrial needs, so that you are actually absorbed into the labor market as soon as you actually finish your graduation. And also, poor quality of education can be countered by high quality relevant content aligned with the industrial standards. And next one is poor research infrastructure. Actually, giving micro credentials has nothing much to do with infrastructure, but here it is the soft skills, that is the skills of the researchers with targeted micro credentials can actually be improved. Next one is representation of women can also be increased, because you provide specific education, of targeted subjects or skills. Next one is autonomy is actually given. That is, here generally what I told you is all these curriculum is actually framed by the UGC as well as AICTE. So providing MEC, that is the micro credentials, this will actually give you more autonomy, because it does not have a rigid framework that has been set by the UGC as well as the AICTE. So now let us look into the government initiatives for higher education. The first one is National Education Policy 2020. This actually aims at increasing your gross enrollment ratio to 50% by 2035. The next one, you have All India Survey of Higher Education, which is nothing but survey and data collection on higher education, so that we are well informed and aware, and the policies are actually framed in tune to this one. The next one is actually Institute of Eminence. This actually aims to empower the higher educational institution. The next we'll see is NRF. This is the National Research Foundation. It actually helps in funding researches in higher educational institution. That is, it supports the scientific research in higher educational institutions. The next one is RUSA. This is nothing but Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan. So this actually aims at the strategic funding for the state institutions. Followed by that, we have the Global Initiative for Academics Network, that is the GIEN. So this actually aims at inviting global academicians to teach in India. So the last one is actually equip. Equip stands for education, quality, upgradation and inclusion program. So this actually aims to improve the quality and accessibility of higher education. So here, if you actually go through this entire concept of higher education, what is it, whether it is a state list or a concurrent list, what are the government initiatives, what is the recent All India survey on higher education, then add the point of microcredits. How is it going to improve your employability gap or bridge that, and how is it going to make you skilled in order to be absorbed into the job market? If you link it this way, then your entire topic of education is actually complete. Okay, so this is how you actually prepare and write an answer for the examination. The next article that we'll be discussing about is US-UK hit Houthi targets in Yemen. This article discusses about the recent airstrike done by the US as well as UK on 36 Houthi targets in Yemen. So here we'll be discussing about the chronology of events that had actually happened, what is the crisis that is taking place in the West Asia currently, and who are the Houthi rebels, and what is the stand that India actually takes on this issue. And also we will look at the maritime threat as well as the security threat in the Red Sea region. So moving forward, we know we will actually be discussing about the West Asian regional crisis here, and this actually becomes important for GS paper 2, that is international relations and effect of policies of the developed and developing countries on India's interest as well as Indian diaspora. So moving forward, we have previous year questions over here that talks about India's energy security that constitutes most important part of India's economic progress, and also talks about India's policy cooperation with West Asian countries. And also a similar question had been in 2022 regarding the I2U2 grouping and how it will actually transform India's position in global geopolitics. So any kind of insurgency or any kind of disturbance that actually happens anywhere across the globe, here we need to understand what is going to be the impact of India, what is going to be India's policy, whether it is non-alignment or dehyphenation. All those actually have to be spoken about. So moving forward, the United States and the United Kingdom had launched a series of strikes against 36 Houthi targets in Yemen from air and surface platforms, including fighter jets. So why did UK and US actually attack the Houthi targets in Yemen? Was that the strikes are in response to the Houthis' attack. That is, the Houthis had taken a series of attacks on the vessels that were traversing or navigating through the Red Sea. So the strikes are in response to the Houthis' attacks against the international and commercial shipping as well as the naval vessels transiting the Red Sea. And the strikes had hit the buried weapons storage facilities, missile systems and launchers and other capabilities that the Houthis actually have used to attack the Red Sea shipping. Now let us understand the timeline of the events and also the strategic importance of the Red Sea. So here, if we look at this infographic, first what happens is it actually started in the month of December 2023, where the Houthi drone and missile attacks against commercial vessels had begun in the Red Sea. Okay, and the Houthis actually had said that this was in response to the Israel's military campaign in Gaza. And following this, what happened? Major shipping firms as well as oil giants had actually paused their operations, fearing any kind of threat if they would navigate through this Red Sea. Okay, due to security concerns. Following that, the UN Security Council had actually condemned this act by the Houthi rebellions, and after that, on December 21st, 2023, US had actually announced an operation called Operation Prosperity Guardian, which was a multinational effort in order to secure the Red Sea region. And following this, the Houthi had attacked on the Red Sea shipping again. That is, they actually attacked a Liberian flagged vessel. And following this, the recent, that is the continuation of this issue, was that the US and UK had launched airstrikes against the Houthi targets in Yemen. So now, why this particular Red Sea region is actually of significant importance is that it actually hosts 15% of seaborne global trade. And also, it acts as a conduit between the West and the East. Okay, so if you move further west, here you have the Mediterranean Sea, and further west you will actually land up in the Atlantic Ocean. And towards the east, you have the Gulf of Aden. We have the Indian Ocean region for the east. So it actually acts as a conduit or a connecting, point between the west as well as the east, that is the Atlantic Ocean as well as the Indian Ocean region. So any kind of security threat that actually happens here will have to force the maritime vessels to actually traverse or cross the entire continent of Africa and then actually reach towards the west, which will actually cost a lot of money, economically not viable, as well as time. Now let us look into who are the Houthis and who are their allies, okay? That is, who are actually supporting them and their ideology. So what happened was that following the civil war in Yemen around the period of 1962, what happened is that Yemen was taken over by a Sunni regime, okay? And what happened, these conservative Sunni regime was actually opposed or rebel against by the Houthis, and Houthis were also against the Saudi Arabia's, Sunni policy, which were also supporting the Yemen. So let us actually see. What happened was the Houthis were the supporters of God, or the Houthi movement was actually under Ansar Allah. They are also known as supporters of God with religious and political roots, okay? And they actually represent Zaydism, which is a subsect of Shia Islam. And this was actually founded in 1990s, and initially it focused on religious revival. That is, the Houthi movement initially was a religious revivalistic movement, and they were against the conservative Sunni ideologies and also against the Sunni regime in Yemen, and also was against Saudi Arabia, which was garnering support to that of Yemen, okay? And the leader was Hussein al-Houthi, who was actually killed in 2004. After this, there was actually the starting or the inception of the civil war, okay? In this war, what happened? The Houthi forces actually seized Sana'a in 2014. See this, if you see in the map, this portion is actually the Sana'a, which is a part of Yemen, and this triggered the civil war. And now what happened? The Saudi-led coalition, okay? I told you that Saudi had already been garnering support to that of Yemen. So that coalition actually intervened in 2015, and Houthis, however, restricted their control to northern Yemen. And finally, in 2022, there was actually a ceasefire that was actually reached, and it lasted for 6 months, okay? Now let us look into the current situation following the civil war. Now what happened was the war, which actually still continued, actually caused a lot of global or economic instability. The maritime security was threatened and also caused a lot of humanitarian crisis along with infrastructure damage as well as economy in crisis. So who are the allies of Houthis? They actually have the backing of Iran, and who supplies weapons and technology to this particular rebellious group, and it also forms a part of axis of resistance along with other forces of Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. Now let us look at the complex web of geopolitical issues associated with the recent strikes, okay? So here the first one is Iran-Saudi rivalry. Do you understand? So here is that the conflict in Yemen actually serves as a proxy battleground for wider regional powers, okay, or wider regional power struggle between Iran as well as Saudi Arabia, okay, because the Houthis are actually backed by Iran and they are fighting against the Yemeni government, which is supported by the Saudi-led government. So here there is actually an Iran-Saudi rivalry that is actually taking place. The next one is maritime security and global trade. I told you that any kind of threat to the Red Sea region, it will actually hamper 15% of the seaborne global trade. And also this will hamper the energy supplies to different countries, okay? And next is the US as well as the UK involvement, okay? So US and UK have been repeatedly, responding to that of the Houthi aggression, and this actually shows the strategic interest in this particular, region, because it actually serves as international shipping lanes. And also their involvement demonstrates their support for, that is not direct support but indirect support for countries of Saudi Arabia and Israel against Iran. US is against Iran, so indirectly it is garnering its support to Saudi Arabia as well as Israel. Now moving on to the humanitarian crisis, we actually saw that international military interventions raise actually questions about the effectiveness of such approaches. There have been a lot of humanitarian crisis that's actually taking place in this region. Now moving on is that we actually see counter-terrorism, that is due to a regional instability in one particular region. There are other terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda which will actually sprout up, okay? And followed by this international law and sovereignty. What happens is when there is a crisis in West Asia, we have the third or the foreign powers which are actually intervening here. And this actually questions the basic virtues or principles adopted in the international law on sovereignty. That is, international laws are always based on non-intervention principles, right? What is the legality of the strikes? What is the ethical extent to which external military can involve? All these are actually questioned here, okay? So now let us look into what are all the implications of India, okay? So this is how the geopolitics is changing, and that is, there is an Iran-Saudi rivalry, there is a lot of maritime security issues, there is external involvement that questions, or there is an extended debate on the international law and sovereignty. So let us see how it will actually affect India and what does India stand on the issue. So here are the implications for India. As we already discussed that, it will actually affect India's energy security because India's 80% of energy imports takes place in this region, that is around the Red Sea region. The second one is that there has been a safety of Indian national concerns over here because a lot of Indian diaspora actually occupy the West Asian region or the Central Asian region. So this will be affected, because of which their remittances will also be affected. If you remember, in 2015, India actually conducted Operation Rahat, where India actually evacuated a number of Indian nationals from Yemen. So as I told you, next one, there will be a threat to the maritime security because India always aspires to be a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. But any kind of uncertainties or threat in the Red Sea will have a larger implication on its future ambitions and aspirations of becoming a net security provider or a global leader there. Next, it actually has an economic impact. Obviously, any kind of disruption in the oil imports will definitely have economic impact in all the countries as well as India. And next one is counter-terrorism, as we already discussed, that any kind of, insurgencies will cause the sprouting of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, etc. And finally, diplomatic balancing act. So India always actually follows the principle of non-alignment movement as well as its current policy of de-hyphenation, where India is also friends with the US and also friends with Iran because we have the Chabahar port here. At the same time, we try to maintain diplomatic relations for our own interests with the US. So India's policy of de-hyphenation is actually handy over here. The next article that we'll be discussing about will be MLAs return as Champai government faces flow test today. So this particular article is regarding a ruling alliance from the Jharkhand Assembly who have actually reached Ranchi for the crucial process of conducting flow test. Okay. So what is the takeaway from this article? See, UPSC does not ask you questions with respect to state related political news or even the national political parties. Okay. So here you need to understand the procedure of the flow test, how it is conducted, who conducts it, what are the constitutional provisions, and what are the associated judgments of the Supreme Court. So here in this particular news, we'll be discussing about flow test as it's very important from Indian polity point of view, and you can trace it to Indian polity prelims as well as GS paper 2, parliament and state legislatures and associated processes. So if we see the previous year question, we had a question on discretionary power given to the governor of a state. So all constitutional offices and their relevant powers, the functioning as well as discretionary powers, how are they different with respect to the state and that of the parliament is actually very important. Moving forward, let us understand the legislatures from the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, again not important. Okay, so here the led ruling alliance have returned to Ranchi from Hyderabad in preparation for a crucial flow test in the Jharkhand Assembly. Okay, so again, as I told you, this is not important. The takeaway is we'll discuss about what is the flow test. So, what is a flow test? Flow test is an important mechanism in a parliamentary democracy where you actually test whether the executive, that is the elected government headed by the chief minister along with his council of ministers, whether they enjoy the majority and the support from the legislature or not. Okay, so this is what it is. A flow test is a mechanism which is used in parliamentary democracy in order to ensure that the executive branch of the government enjoys the confidence of the legislature. And this is a crucial tool in order to understand whether there is a balance of power between the executive and the legislature. Now, it is important to understand when does the process of flow test actually happens? When there is a uncertainty in the majority. Okay, so when does that happen? It could be either after a general election or after the formation of a new government or during the death or the resignation of the prime minister or a chief minister, and when a coalition government is fractured. Moving forward, let us look into who calls for it and who conducts this particular flow test. Okay, so the governor of a state may call for a flow test, and this is enshrined in Article 175 of the Constitution. However, the Constitution does not mention the term flow test. This is very, very important. Okay, and in the context of the Parliament of India, then it is the president. In case of the state legislative assembly, it is the governor, and in case of the Parliament of India, it is the president. And who conducts it is that it is conducted by the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of the state or the Lok Sabha in case of the union government. Okay. So, by this you will understand that the flow test is conducted both in the state legislative assembly as well as in the center. Okay, in case of whether to test the CM if he enjoys the majority or not, or to actually test if the prime minister of the ruling party enjoys the majority or the confidence of the legislature or not. It is simple. So, how it is conducted? Let us understand the procedure. First, what happens is that a vote of confidence is actually passed or it is moved by the chief minister or the prime minister. Following this, what happens? The members of the legislative body, either the state legislature or the parliament, then they actually vote for this particular confidence or they actually vote against the motion if they don't support. And in case if the majority of the members vote in favor, then the government is considered to have confidence and hence it will actually retain its power and continue its functioning. Otherwise, if it actually does not get the majority, then it will be expected to resign. So now we will understand what are the scenarios after the flow test. There are only two scenarios, okay? So one scenario is that if the members actually vote in for confidence, then the government retains majority and the government continues its function. Whereas when the government loses the majority, what happens? The governor in case of the state legislature or the president in case of the parliament will invite the leader of the second largest political party in order to form the government. Or the governor or the president will recommend president's role or call for fresh elections. Moving forward, now let us understand the constitutional provisions related to the flow test in India. Okay, so I told you that the constitution does not explicitly mention the term flow test anywhere in the constitution. Okay, however, this is a principle which is ingrained as a collective responsibility. What is collective responsibility? According to Article 75 Clause 3, with respect to that of the union government, and 164 Clause 2, we will understand what is the principle of collective responsibility. That is, the union government, which states that the Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the House of the People, that is the Lok Sabha. And Article 164 Clause 2, for the state governments, it states that the Council of Ministers is collectively responsible for the Legislative Assembly of the state. Article, that is 175 Clause 2, it actually gives power to the governor to summon the House in order to require a flow test in order to prove the majority. Okay. So, moving forward, what are the related Supreme Court judgments? Let us see. In the S.R. Bommai versus Union of India case 1994, In this landmark judgment, the Supreme Court actually had said that the strength of the government has to be tested via the flow test and it should not be subjectively decided by the governor. So, the Supreme Court also held that the power of the president in order to dismiss the government of the state is not absolute. Moving on to the next case, that is Jagdambika Pal versus Union of India. Here, the Supreme Court had actually ordered a composite flow test. So, what is a composite flow test? It is nothing but when two individuals of the same political party actually fight for power, okay, such as the case of Tamil Nadu, where we have the OPS and the EPS. Both of them had actually fought for the post of the chief minister belonging to only one political party, that is AIADMK. Next one is Karnataka Legislative Assembly case 2018, where the Supreme Court actually ordered a live telecast of the flow test in order to ensure the transparency and fairness of the process of flow test of the Karnataka Assembly. So, I hope you have actually understood the entire concept of flow test. These minute processes are actually very important for your examination. Though the news is political, you need to carry away or take away whatever is important for your examination. Okay. So, the next article that we'll be discussing about is Crown Jewel that was. So, here we'll be discussing about the recent crisis in the dispute settlement mechanism of the World Trade Organization, that is the WTO. We will see what are the alternatives, and before all that we need to understand such international groupings are very, very important for the examination. Its membership, whether India is a founding member or not, or currently is it holding the chair, then the agenda of any kind of round of talks that are actually happening, what are the outcomes and what are India's commitments to it, all of them become important for your examination. So here we'll be discussing about what is WTO, what are its functions, the membership, as well as the crisis in the dispute resolution mechanisms. Okay. So here, as I told you, we'll be discussing about WTO as well as international trade that it actually focuses on, and this becomes important for GS paper 2, important international institution, agencies and fora, their structure and mandate. So, if you see, there have been many questions that were on the WTO. Like, for example, if you see, WTO is an important international institution. This has appeared in 2014, where it is asked about the mandate of the organization and how binding are the decisions of its appellate tribunal, which is present there. And then they have asked about critically analyzing India's stand on the latest round of talks on food security. So, India's disputes with respect to that of WTO is also very important. Next one is the broader aims and objectives of WTO have been asked, and what are the differences between the developed and developing countries, and the Indian perspective is important. Okay, so any kind of international grouping is actually important, and specifically India's relation to that of the same is actually important, and how does the dispute actually affect India is very, very important. Now moving forward, the 13th Ministerial Conference, that is MC13 of the World Trade Organization, is scheduled to happen between 26th and 29th of February 2024 in Abu Dhabi, UAE, which will focus on addressing the crisis in WTO's dispute settlement mechanism. So now, before moving into the dispute settlement mechanism, let us understand WTO as an organization. So, as we all know, it is an international organization that actually primarily deals with the rules of trade between the nations at a global level. It aims to ensure that international trade actually flows smoothly, it actually flows freely as well as predictably as possible. Next is, it was established in 1995 under the Marrakesh Agreement, and now it actually has 164 member countries and 24 observer governments. And India was one of the founding members of the World Trade Organizations. Now let us understand about the dispute settlement mechanism of WTO. Okay, so the dispute settlement mechanism of WTO is a long process. Okay, it is done by a large body which consists of a panel as well as an appellate body. Now let us actually see. Okay, this appellate body actually has 7 independent members who are appointed for a period of 4 years each. After which, before the entry of new members, it requires the consent of all the members of the WTO. So that is where the crisis actually had happened, because since 2019, US had actually been blocking the entry of new members because it thinks all the awards that have been given by this appellate body were actually against the sovereignty, as well as there were involvement of the judicial activism over there. So now let us look into it. The WTO's dispute settlement mechanism is often referred to as the central pillar of the global trading system. This is basic. Next is, it is a two-tiered process for resolving trade disputes between the member countries, consisting of a panel and an appellate body. This appellate body is a judicial body which is permanent in nature, which is made up of 7 independent members. And this hears the appeals from the decisions made by the WTO panels, and whatever is finally made by this judicial body is final and binding on the members. So what is the current crisis in the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism is that it has been facing crisis since the end of 2019, primarily due to the United States blocking the appointment of new members to the appellate body. As I told you, because it thinks that all the award that has been given by this appellate body is actually affecting the sovereignty, and there is an element of judicial activism which is actually involved, which are against the United States. So this has effectively paralyzed the appellate body, as it no longer has the quorum needed to hear and decide on the new cases. And this has left the WTO without a functioning two-tiered dispute, which is always there in the process, and this has undermined the organization's ability in order to provide security and predictability to the multilateral trading system. Moving forward, let us see what are the alternate pathways to this particular issue. Okay, so we have pathways to resolution, as we see. So there is MPIA, that is Multi-Party Interim Appeal Arbitration Arrangement, which is actually led by the European Union as an alternative to this arbitration mechanism. The advantage of this particular mechanism is that it mimics the appellate body procedures, but the disadvantage to this is it is ad hoc in nature, and this may lack predictability as well as consistency. Because we saw the appellate body of the WTO was actually a permanent body consisting of 7 independent members with a definite term of 4 years. But here it is ad hoc in nature, so that might be a great disadvantage. The next one is diluted appellate body, where this is actually a proposal for an appellate body with limited powers. The advantage of this is it addresses the US concerns by limiting the scope, and the disadvantage is it may compromise the effectiveness in ensuring fair trade practices. It might actually be inclined towards any particular nation. The next one is resurrecting the original appellate body with opt-out option. So what is this? This is reinstating the appellate body with an opt-out option for the countries. The one good thing or the advantage about that is that it preserves the integrity of the dispute resolution mechanism. On the other hand, it actually has the exclusion of significant trading nations, and that could affect the universality of the regional grouping. Okay. So these are all the pros and cons that we actually saw on the pathways to resolution. So here what is of most importance is WTO and how is India related to WTO. The next article that we'll be discussing about is Paytm Payment Bank's future uncertain post RBI silence. So this particular article is discussing about recent RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India, which has actually barred the Paytm payment banks from offering its banking services. Okay. So now here we'll be discussing about what are payment banks and how it is different from the other banks. And there will be covering banking in India. And this particular topic is important from GS paper 3, inclusive growth, and for prelims it comes under Indian economy. So there has been a previous year question, that is the establishment of payment banks, and this had actually come in 2016. So the banking sector in India, different kinds of banks, the services they offer, it is all very important for your examination. So moving forward, recently the Reserve Bank of India has barred the Paytm payment banks from offering banking services as of Feb 29, 2024. So now it is important to understand what are payment banks and how they are actually different from other banks. Okay. So these are a new model of banks, and they were actually, introduced or came into existence after the recommendations of the Nachiket Committee. So let us see. Payment banks are a new model of banks conceptualized on the recommendations of Nachiket More Committee, which was established by the Reserve Bank of India. So this particular initiative was a part of broader financial inclusion strategy in order to make banking services accessible to all and inclusive to all, especially in rural and semi-urban areas where traditional banking infrastructure do not reach most of the time. Next, they offer a limited range. Here, what are they talking about? Payment banks. Okay, so they offer a limited range of banking services, focusing primarily on deposits and payment services without engaging in credit services. Okay, for example, if other banks actually give you loans as well as credit cards, here the payment banks, they don't give you loans or credit cards. Instead, they actually give you other services like debit cards. Okay, and they allow you for a demand deposit also, but up to only an extent, for example, up to 2 lakh rupee. So now let us understand the differences between the payment banks as well as the other traditional banks in India. So first one, what are the services offered by payment banks? It is limited to accepting the demand deposits, remittance services, ATM services are there, as well as debit cards. Okay, whereas it is actually different because it actually does not give you loans or credit cards, whereas other traditional banks do. Next one is credit facilities. They cannot offer loans or credit cards. Here they can offer both. Here the deposit limit is only up to rupees 2 lakh per customer. Here no such limit on the amount of deposit in other traditional banks. Here investment of deposits is, it is mandatory to invest a significant portion in government securities. Here you have the freedom to invest in various assets including the loans itself. Next, the risk profile is, here there is actually a lower risk due to no credit services because they don't give you your loans. So non-performing assets, etc., will be very, it is nil. Whereas here the banks actually have higher risk due to involvement in credit services. Next, target customers are unbanked as well as underbanked population and small businesses, because the target was here to actually provide financial inclusions in order to reach the rural as well as semi-urban areas. Here, wide range of customers are there in traditional bankings, including individuals, businesses, as well as governments. Here, if you see operational area, I told you rural and as well as semi-urban, whereas here it is urban, semi-urban, as well as caters to the rural areas. Capital requirement is, the minimum paid up equity capital is rupees 100 crores. So what do you mean by paid up equity capital? It is the amount that the investors actually pay to the company in order to buy its shares. Okay, so when a company actually sells its shares, the amount of money it actually gets from the investor is called as the paid up equity capital. So that can be up to rupees 100 crores. Whereas if you see in other traditional banks, it is a higher minimum capital requirement depending on the size of the bank. Then if you see the promoter's contribution, promoter must contribute at least 40% of the paid up equity capital, whereas here the requirement actually varies. Generally, it is lower than in that of the payment banks. So moving forward, let us look into the regulation. That is, who regulates the payment banks in India. So the payment banks will be registered as a public limited company under the Companies Act of 2018. And these are governed by the provisions of the Banking Regulation Act, that is the BRA Act of 1949, the RBI Act of 1934. Then you have the FEMA, that is Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1999. Then Payment and Settlement Systems Act of 2007 and other relevant statutes and directives. And these banks are supposed to maintain a particular cash reserve ratio. And it is also required to invest a minimum of 75% of its demand deposit balances in statutory liquidity ratio, eligible government securities, treasury bills with maturity up to 1 year. So it is important to understand these parameters of cash reserve ratio and statutory liquidity ratio. Okay. So the statutory liquidity ratio is the amount of liquid assets that a particular bank has to hold with itself in its vault. Okay. For example, it can be in terms of gold assets, it can be in terms of cash, etc. It has to hold itself, and the current SLR is 18%. Whereas the cash reserve ratio is the particular percentage of money that a bank has to hold with the central bank. That is, in India, it is the Reserve Bank of India. So the cash reserve ratio is 4.5%. So these percentages are actually very important for your examination, as well as the definitions of these, the differences between, and what happens when the SLR increases and what impact does it have on the other indicators. All these are actually important for your examination. Let us solve few prelims as well as mains practice questions. The first question reads, consider the following statements about the World Trade Organization. India is a founding member of WTO. Yes, it is correct. The WTO was established in 1995 under the Marrakesh Agreement. This is also correct. So since both the statements are correct, the answer is C, that is both 1 and 2. Since it is asked which of the statements given above is or are correct. Moving forward, with respect to the WTO's DSM, that is Dispute Settlement Mechanism, consider the following statements. The DSM is a single-tiered process. No, it is double. The next one is the WTO's DSM allows member countries to resolve their trade disputes solely through negotiation without any judicial process. This is actually wrong. So, the answer will be D, neither 1 nor 2. Moving forward, match the following organizations with the correct descriptions, and the organizational descriptions are given here. The first one is Hamas. It is actually a Sunni Islamic militant organization ruling the Gaza Strip. The Hezbollah is a Shia Islamist political party and militant group based in Lebanon. The final one is the Houthis, which is a Zaidi Shia-led religious political party movement that emerged from Shada in northern Yemen. So by going by this, the answer will be option A, that is A2, B1 and C3. Moving forward, consider the following statements about the payment banks in India. Payment banks can offer credit cards to customers. No, it cannot. The minimum paid up equity capital for a payment bank is 100 crores. Yes, this is correct. And payment banks are not required to maintain a cash reserve ratio. This is wrong. So since only the statement 2 is correct, the answer will be option B. Moving on to the fifth question, with reference to the concept of a flow test in the parliamentary system of India, consider the following statements. A flow test is a crucial tool in maintaining the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. Yes, this is correct. The procedure is explicitly mentioned and detailed within the Indian Constitution. No, this is actually wrong. So the answer will be A, that is 1 only, since only the first statement was correct. Moving forward, now solving the mains practice question. In the context of evolving landscape of higher education in India, evaluates the role of micro-credentials in enhancing the employability and bridging the skill gap. How do they complement the traditional macro-credential system, and what are the implications do they hold for the future of higher education in India? As we already know that education is actually a very, very important topic of discussion. So here the approach to the answer is divided into 3, that is introduction, body as well as conclusion. In the introduction, first we will actually explain or define what is micro-credentials and their emergence in India's higher education sector. In the body, we'll talk about the employability and skill gap that actually persists in the higher education landscape in India and how it has to be integrated with the higher education and future implications, where here we'll also discuss about the global examples. Okay. In the conclusion, we will conclude by considering the future trajectory of higher education with the integration of this micro-credentials and the necessary steps for effective implementation. And we'll also discuss about few of the government measures or initiatives in this regard. So we are done with our daily news analysis. For our regular updates, please do like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS YouTube channel. Thank you.